Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa alihi tahirin. We are continuing our course, The Comparative Religion, and we are on lesson 9 of our course text. We're continuing with our discussion on comparative beliefs. And in the last lessons, you have seen that we compared the text, the sacred scriptures, and then we compared monotheism and had a little bit about practical comparison between some laws like prayers. Now, today we're going to talk about the next fundamental of Islam, which is nubuwah, prophethood. So we said, according to majority of the scholars, I think probably said it over here, right? According to majority of our scholars in Shia Islam, three fundamental beliefs bind us together as Muslims: Tawheed, Nubuwah, and Ma'ad. The uniqueness of Allah, the prophethood, and the Day of Judgment. And two of them bind us together, plus those three, of course. Two extra ones bind us together as Shia Muslims in the Kalami sense, in the theology sense. That is the Adl of Allah, the justice of Allah, and the Imama, the successorship. So here we're looking at comparative aspect of those three important fundamentals. And we can see that there are similar beliefs in the Abrahamic religions, although their beliefs in these are not complete. Why? Because there's things that we have that they don't have. Um, and like in prophethood here in Nabuwa, we have the Khatam an-Nabi, the seal of the prophetic mission, seal of the prophets. So there's areas the extent differs. So it's not enough to keep them to it's not enough to put them in the folds of Islam, right? They're still Ahlul Kitab. But they have a similar beliefs to an extent. Okay, that's something we can compare on. We have similar beliefs to an extent, not entirely completely the same though. So let's look at prophethood. Prophethood or nubuwah in Islam and Judaism, besides being extremely important in both religions, they share many common grounds. There are many common areas in which we as Muslims share with Judaism and even Christianity. The most important prophet to Judaism is Prophet Musa or Musha, Prophet Moses alayhi salam. In Islam, if you were to have a look at the Quran, if you were just to look at the Holy Quran and analyze who is the most mentioned prophet in the Holy Quran by name, you will find that Musa is the most mentioned prophet. So in Islam, Musa is a very important person. Even in our story in Tafsir Qumi, there's a hadith that talks about the Mi'raj story. And Prophet Musa is up there uh, giving advice to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu to go in and ask Allah to lower the amount of prayers. So Moses is very important for both Judaism and Islam, for Bani Israel and for Islam, and also for Christianity. Um, so if you look at the Holy Quran, besides Musa being Prophet Musa besides this important figure, we also share other common prophets. We also share in the belief in other prophets, such as Prophet Noah, Nuh, Prophet Yaqub, Jacob, Yaakov, I think, Yaakov, they call, um, Ibrahim, Yusuf, Joseph, Harun, Aaron, Dawood, Suleiman, Elijah, Elias, Yunus, Jonah, Job, Ayub, and more. So we have, if you were to look at the Quranic text, you see that there is mention of very many important figures and prophets mentioned in Al-Kitab, in the history of Bani Israel. So we share a lot of common ground and we share similar stories to an extent. Lots of common ground. Yes, of course, there are differences and there's areas of discussion, debate, interpretation, but we do basically share many common things, many common prophets. We believe in Noah, Abraham, Jacob, Yaqub, Yusuf, Harun, Suleiman, Dawood, Elijah, Yunus, Ayub, Yashua, Moses. We believe in these prophets and we hold them in special regard. We have stories about them in our narrations and in the Quran. We learn about them and learn from them and from their stories. We believe in them. Of course, some historical works in the biblical books we have critiques about. Now, um, when you look at the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, remember I said it was three different uh, sections being compiled together? You had the first five books, which is considered the Torah. Then um, you have you have a section of history books. Now, of course, Judaism has a traditional understanding of who wrote these, but some academic scholars they'll be a bit dubious and doubtful of who actually wrote those books and when about did they come about. If you notice in those history books, that is where you find some some bad things mentioned about some of the prophets that we disagree with. And if we look and analyze things from the socio-political environment, and if we were to able to determine in what period of time these were written, and maybe it was written over a period of time, maybe people added or whatever, um, then then we would maybe start to see that with a bit suspicion some of those things. So this is quite you have to be like a professor in your research on these things, of course. But we have some critiques about some of these as per our theological understanding of the Shia school of thought. Because why? Because we believe prophets were sinless. We believe they were sinless. Yes, we believe that they can do something called Tark al-Awwal. What's Tark al-Awwal? Tark al-Awwal is where you have two good options and you take the lesser good option. Okay, this could be profoundly troublesome to a prophet who's up to such a high level. He doesn't do any sin. If sin is something that's haram or leaving a wajib, prophets don't do that, right? So they are not committing sins. and they are infallible in their duties. But can they leave the best for the better? Yes, that could happen. Or can there sometimes be laws which are not legislated? Like there's discussion on Prophet Adam. Was it actually a sin or not? So some say, look, it was Tark Alwell. He was given advice or shadi advice to not do something, but he did it. He didn't actually commit a sin. Others will come and say, look, there was no Sharia legislation that made it a sin. So it wasn't actually technically a sin. This is, you could research these things and see and analyze these issues in our theology, but I'm telling you what we have amongst the Shia scholars being discussed. So we believe that the prophets were sinless. Prophets have to have something called infallibility, meaning that they cannot have qualities or actions which would push off people from listening to the message and considering the message. So if a prophet was a sinner, then he would be accused of lying. If he's lying, then how could people trust his message? How could people trust what he's saying? So these kinds of things. Now we gotta have a more in-depth analysis, but I'm telling you what we have and what's said amongst our scholars and in briefly about our theology. So over there, we'd have some intellectual and at times some textual critiques when we come to certain details. And what is in the biblical text is also open to critiques about why it is there, how it got there. Is there something we're missing in the text here? Was there a reason someone put it there? You got to remember that back then it wasn't simple life. Just like nowadays, it's not simple life. If you look at the political environment, there's different systems and there's different thoughts and different ideological thoughts and different political thoughts and different social trends and different cultural trends. Same thing back then. Yes, it may not have been as diverse as we are now because we have internet and communications and all this mass sharing, but it was still diverse and there were still influences. There was still a political environment. Like I said, the government after Prophet Dawood, after Prophet Suleiman, it split into two systems, and then you had other neighboring things. Then after that, you had the fall of the northern kingdom. Then you had the fall of the southern kingdom of Judah, and then you had the Babylonians, and then you had the Persians, and the Persians had sent some of the Bani Israel, the people who actually did leave the land were taken away because some people stayed in the land according to some academics. And then you had them sent back, and these were the people from exile. And then you had the Greeks took over, and then you had divisions amongst the Greeks, and you had all these different political functions going on over hundreds and thousands of years, and the Romans, and you have during that time in that second period of second temple period time, we could trace these texts back to. So there is a lot to consider. And even before that second temple period time, there was corruptions going on and there was political strife and there was oppressions happening. So we cannot just ignore the context in which those texts have arrived, in which they've occurred. So it's very important. It's very important. We have to understand the context in which something is being spoken. But regardless of our critiques and disagreements on some details, we believe in many common things, many common prophets. In fact, in the book of Barashit, Genesis, the first book of the Pentateuch in the Hebrew Bible, it contains many important stories related to the prophets. It contains stories about Prophet Noah, Abraham, the story of the people of Lut, or they call Lot. and also a large section of the Prophet Yaqub and Yusuf alayhi salam. However, when we arrive at some of these verses, we can agree with many things. We can look at them and be like, hey, that's very similar to what we have. But other times, we may arrive at some of these verses and we may question them. And we may want to compare them with our authentic resources in Islam and see, do we have a different story that's correcting their error, that's correcting the fabrication, the tarif? Now, why is that tahrif there? Maybe it's something as simple as not putting the period in the right place, or something as simple as changing harakats, or it could be something like moving verses around. But we want to see, has Islam had anything to say about it or no? It's important. It is also possible that we have lost connection to the original language of these texts. You know, there could be a discussion. I'm just giving a hypothesis. I'm not saying for sure. You have to see a discussion about the word wine in the Hebrew, ancient Hebrew. Does it mean just grape juice? Does it mean vinegar? Even maybe you could look in like the Septuagint I found in one of the history books, something that seemed to me to be like a clue of context to indicate its usage for vinegar. Right? I'm no expert in biblical text and the history back then. I mean, there's people who could study more, but it's something to look into to see, is that a valid observation? It talked about bringing wine for the people in from their like dehydration in the desert. Now, if you go look and see, what did they use vinegar for from people faint in the desert? Well, what did they use wine for? Did they use wine or did they use vinegar? Well, people would sometimes use vinegar. Now, I don't know if they used it in that age, in that time. You have to investigate. But here, okay, maybe it's some kind of some kind of clue of context. We'd have to see. Also, you had the Nazarite Creed, which these guys they would take like is said to be Samson was one of these Nazarites. They wouldn't cut, they'd make a vow and they wouldn't cut their hair and they wouldn't drink wine and they wouldn't drink or eat anything from grape, right? So this was said to be a good thing, right? So there's things in those texts that maybe it hasn't been critically analyzed, right? So you have to see and analyze these things and see if you could get certitude over there. I'm just giving you maybes because when I looked at things, I seen maybe this, maybe that, and interesting things. But if you have to take the research in your own hands and do more thorough research. So maybe we lose connection with to the original language of these texts, or that things are moved around, or that there is some other issues over here. We even have that wine was prohibited whenever the religious missions, prophetic missions were complete in our hadith, right? So we know that it must have been prohibited, right? So just to add that to what I was saying, so we know it must be. Now we look at that text and we analyze the text and see where is the evidence for its prohibition, and you see things. You see things. Hey, and you could say, oh, there maybe that's it. And especially with knowing that maybe things were moved around, oh, you could research these things, and like I said, different maybes on the language. Yet at the same time, we should not be biased to reject immediately something that's in these books. Rather, perhaps sometimes there can be a reconciliation, right? Um, so sometimes maybe we could reconcile something. As an example, I'll bring an example here. Now, this just we're going to look at something from the aspect of an archaeological discussion a little bit. And you could do more research on this. Again, it's just a maybe, right? So in the book of Genesis, it states, this is the English of it, and the ark came to rest. So talking about Prophet Nuh after the flood, the ark, so the Safina, the ship, it came to rest in the seventh month, in the seventh month, on the 17th day of the month, on the mountains of Ararat. Is Genesis 8, verse 4. Notice here the mention of the plural. The mention is on the plural word mountains of Ararat. Okay? It's not saying a single mountain. It's not saying a single mountain. It is a plural. Mountains. Now, obviously, the Ark of Noah, the Ark of Nuh, alayhi Islam, seems like it would have settled on one mountain, right? So this text, this probably, we could say that maybe this text is referring to an area. You know, like if I said, where do you live? You live in the mountains of Appalachian Mountains, right? You live on a specific mountain, Appalachian Mountain, specific area, or some other mountains where there's different mountains, yeah. And then you say, I live on the Appalachian Mountains. I live in the area of the Appalachian Mountains. So maybe this verse is about an area of mountains, not the specific name of the particular mountain it rested on, as many have tried to take it as. So people have been looking for this Mount Ararat. You know, where is it on Mount Ararat? So here, it's an area, right? Giving you an area. Now, why is that in the text like that? That's another question, right? Could be purposely vague if this was, really revealed this way. If this was the real revelation, it could be purposely vague. But if it was tahrif or something added, then now that's another discussion. Maybe people knew it was in that area, but didn't know the exact mountain. There's no problem if Allah keeps it vague. No problem. Uh, it was for a later time to tell you specifically, or for maybe you had to follow the true inheritors of the knowledge to get that specific area. Okay. So then we go to the Holy Quran. What do we find in the Holy Quran? In Surah 11, Ayat 44. وَقِيلَ يَا أَرْضُ أَبْلَعِي مَاءَكِ وَيَا سَمَاءُ أَقْلِعِي. So this is, and it was said, O earth, swallow down your water, and O skies, they translate as clear away, and the water was made to abate, and the affair was decided. It's just a transinterpretation. Now, here you have our point here. Wastawat ala al-judi. Okay? This is about the ark. It rested on al-judi. This gives us the specific name of a mountain, Mount al-Judi. And it was said, away with the unjust people. Wakila bu'dan, Akila bu'dan, liqawmi adh-dhalimin. Away with the unjust people. Okay, so we see now when looking and comparing these two verses, which talk about where the ark of the Safina of Nuh was, where the Safina to Nuh was. It's on the Genesis says mountains of Ararat. Holy Quran says Mount Judi, right? Okay, so now we have to see. Now, of course, I should caution here. This investigation has not thoroughly gone through the narrations to see if we have anything reliable, but we're just comparing some beliefs, and you have to do the further research in our side. So some researchers from Ahlul Kitab, the Christian researchers, they say that they found a structure that resembles the ark on Mount Judi. Okay? which one can see from that mountain, the mountains of Ararat. So I've seen a video on this. This is over there. You can see the mountains of Ararat, and this is on Mount Judy. So it's in that area, right? This mountain is situated in a modern day Turkey, above the modern Mosul, Mosul, Iraq. So it's above there in Turkey, or Turkey. If this is really the Ark of Prophet Nuh, and if this is really close to those mountains, maybe it can be reconciled. As maybe back then this was all the areas of Mount Ararat, right? As the true destination was affirmed and confirmed in the Holy Quran, and the mountain ranges or area was mentioned in the current version of Genesis. So if we can do some historical research, and if we prove that's really the Ark there, some basic research onto these mountain names and these areas, and see what we could derive and understand, then maybe we could reconcile this verse, right? Maybe we can reconcile these views. Now, of course, we know the Holy Quran is this is the authentic word from Allah the Exalted. So it is on Mount Judy. So if we found Mount Judy and it's there, you have to do some research, of course, and see, um, of course, when that name was started for Mount Judy and all these such things. However, this is just an observation, right? This is worth some research, and it's up to you. You could research it more. However, if we could not reconcile these two views, then if we prove the Ark was found on Mount Judy, then it again proves that Islam affirms what was discovered in the 1950s archaeologically. That in the 1950s they say they found this Ark-like structure on Mount Judy. Hence, we face possibilities when dealing with the text. Then, first possibility is the text is here and just altered in its language, or we have lost connection with its language, which certainly has happened in many cases. Second possibility is someone has added in something into the text, which can be signified by their opinions in the time of writing the text or their of context. Here, we may add a possibility of commentaries being added into the text, just same as maybe I brought up before, or transinterpretations affecting the text. And this is only possible and needs to be evaluated scientifically. The third is the writing of different books or by different authors, then compiled together. Somebody put them together, like some of the biblical um, scholars in the academia they believe. And this is another issue that puts forward, which would explain some of the inconsistencies that we'd find. Regardless, we don't want to reject something unless we know for sure it is against what Allah the Exalted has said. Hence, we must be careful and have certitude behind us for the issues we face. Now, of course, there are things that seem like straight out contradictions in these books. So those would be problems, and we got to investigate each issue. And you can spend a lifetime doing this kind of comparison, I'm sure, or a long time if you were active. But anyways, when we're dealing with the text, it's important to understand a variety of different factors that could affect the text. When we're dealing with a text like this, of the biblical text and the Tanakh or even the New Testament, a variety of different factors could have impacted that text and could have impacted those books. Especially since those books were sometimes compiled over periods of time or rewritten by scribes who may have added things or lost things in different manuscripts. So, or different interpretations or a loss of language. So there's many different factors when looking into a text. So we don't want to straight out just reject something. We want to analyze it critically and have certitude that it is wrong and see the problems of it to be able to say that it is not right. So that is everything for this lesson. Wa akhiru du'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.